Hello, my name is Amelia. I'm going to be talking about my semester in Rwanda. I'm part of the Wolfpack team from an FTC team based out of Massachusetts. And this past semester, my family and I moved to Rwanda. So I'm going to be discussing how I started 35 FLL teams and my process for doing that. And the first thing I did, of course, was talk to my parents. They were already moving there, but I wanted to talk to them about my plan. I wrote up a little pitch for them and discussed what I was doing. After that, I actually talked to my school, of course, because I needed to get them on board with me taking a semester abroad. And once everyone was okay with this plan, I talked to some FLL managers based in Massachusetts. So the people I talked to were WPI, which is the operational managers for FLL in Massachusetts. And they really helped me get an understanding for the criteria of starting teams. They told me how many teams I needed to start, which is 25 FLL teams to be a region, which was super helpful. And they just gave me some tips in terms of how I was going to approach new schools and how I should also talk to the administrators of schools about starting teams. So once I realized that this could actually turn out to be a reality, I was actually going to be moving, I started to form a company called STEM Inspires. And the first thing I did there was file my articles of incorporation to make sure that the company was a nonprofit. And then I filed Form 1023 with the IRS so that it was qualified as a 501c3. And that means I could accept donations that were tax deductible. And once my company was, once I filed my articles of incorporation, I had started emailing schools. And so I emailed about 12 schools originally that were based in Rwanda. That was the first step of me reaching out to the Rwandan community. I just wanted to see, I wasn't sure where I was going to get like any responses I got back because I had never really actually approached schools before about this. So this was something that was completely new to me. And I wrote them a pretty long email and I heard back from about 2 immediately within the next few days. And then the following few weeks, I heard back from about 4 more. So I had probably 6 schools that told me they were interested. And I thought that was enough. I set a goal for starting 10. And from there, I started fundraising for those 10 kits, which ended up being about $5,000. So once I had raised that money, I ended up calling the first operational partner. So the WPI people told me that I should talk to the operational partner based in Rwanda, which is called Coderina, and they run a bunch of FLL teams in Central Africa. So the operational partner basically is the one who dictates what goes on in the region, what happens. They make sure that everything I'm doing follows first standards. So I reached out to them and I talked to a man named Ade, and he's the founder. And I found his number actually online, just did some research, and he was super enthusiastic, super kind, and told me that we could set up a Zoom call once I got to Rwanda. So once I secured the funding, I secured a partner that I was really excited about. The next step was really moving there. And once I moved there, it was going to these schools that responded to my email. So when I started teams, email was the first step. And then I would go to the school and pitch to the administrators. So like the head of school, occasionally some teachers, and I would tell them about the program, what First Legally was, and how many kids were involved, the materials the school would need. They would need internet, they would need to have a dedicated coach. These are the sort of things that I was asking them to make sure that they could promise. And I was explaining them the benefits of the program again, because Rwanda is really interested in hands-on learning at the moment. And this is something that I think a lot of the people in the education industry were saying, oh, this is awesome because this is what we're trying to bring into our classroom, is a lot more hands-on learning. So that was something I stressed a lot. And I talked to the school admins, and then I talked to teachers, and then finally I would talk to the students. So I would go back to a single school maybe 2 or 3 times before I actually would go for my first training session with the students. And this all occurred in September. So I came to Rwanda at the end of September in 2022. And by actually the second day I was there, I ended up going to my first school, which is the Gashora Girls Academy, which was that photo you saw in the very beginning of this slide. And they were super enthusiastic. They were about 2 hours away from Kigali, which is where I moved. It was the capital of Rwanda. And they were 2 hours away, so we drove there, and I drove with my mom, and I met with the administrators, and I think they were kind of blown away. They had some of the best reactions. They just thought the program was amazing. They were the ones who had actually emailed me first, responded, which is why, again, I met with them first, and they were super thrilled. So I actually, right that day, met with they have a STEM teacher, and his name was Benjamin, and I met with him. He, again, was also super enthusiastic, and then I met with the students as well. I pitched the program. And as you can see here, I'm talking to some of the students in this photo down here. And again, that was sort of the breakdown of how I got FLL to these schools. So I would arrive also with a kit. That was a really important detail, was bringing the materials and showing them the pieces that they would be building with, and then showing them the Spike Prime app that I was using really made it possible for them to see what this program was and how it was worked and what pieces were used. So that was something I think was really important for me, was just showing them the materials, because then once they saw it and they could feel all the pieces and Legos and they understood what the materials really were, that's when they started getting really interested. And this is, I just want to show this picture here. This is a school, the Bright School, and we have here Jan Brown, who started the Bright School. They have a really unique approach to learning in Rwanda. It's mostly teacher-led, so a lot of the times the classrooms have one teacher and you're going to be receiving a lecture and you're going to be writing, and it's not really it's not a really cooperative environment, I would say, which was something that Jan Brown had noticed as well. And she actually, when she started the school, was trying to do a more hands-on approach, which again Rwanda is trying to do now, and that's what they're slowly moving towards it. But that's what she was really stressing that, and she actually had brought some Spike pieces and Spike kits to the school, and so they had already seen some of these Lego pieces, which is fantastic. And here actually on her left, she's holding Philemon, and he's one of our employees actually for STEM Inspires from Rwanda. So I thought this was a really beautiful picture too, just because this is their school. This is the administrator's building, so you can just kind of get a sense of the different environments that these people are working in. Again, so once I talked to the schools and I got the students interested, it was a matter of training the coaches. Each team had about 2 coaches. Some had more, some had fewer. You're supposed to have 2, but there's at least always 1 dedicated coach. And so to make sure that these coaches understood what was going on, I held some coaching training sessions. And to do this, I partnered with Creativity Lab, which is based in Kigali, and they have a beautiful space which is dedicated to training individuals, mostly students and teachers, about STEM. So they were super thrilled to have me come and discuss programming and just building basics. So I would bring my Spike Prime kits, and we would have the teachers build some of their robots, and then we would talk about programming. Most of the time these sessions were about programming, and they learned to code, and they would also review the project a little bit, because First Lego League, as you may know, has the 3 different aspects. You have the core values, you have the project, and you have the robot. So we would go through those 3 different aspects to make sure that they understood what was going on. Because what I found was the program itself was kind of confusing, because there's so many different nested parts, because you have the core values and you have your project, but then the project you have to present, and then the core values, you have different team building activities. And so there was just a lot of different aspects that I had to try to go through one by one. And actually to do this, I created a curriculum, or Wolfpack helped me as well create a curriculum to train these coaches on a week-by-week basis, so that they could go with their team and say, okay, this is week 2, we've had our kit for 2 weeks, what should we be doing? And this was translated by Philemon into Kinyarwanda, so that they would be able to understand, because the local language is Kinyarwanda, and while most of them speak English, it's a little bit difficult for them to understand exactly what I'm saying and to follow along. So we created this this week-by-week breakdown, so that they would be able to understand and follow along in their language, which it turned out to be really helpful, because a lot of times I would give a presentation and then they would ask me questions that were very clearly, they were talked about in the presentation. It's just that they didn't understand, because I was probably speaking too quickly and they didn't understand my accent. So that was something I thought was super helpful. And again, these training sessions allowed the coaches to ask me any questions that they had. And one thing I think that was sort of unique for me, as what I would say, is I had to train the coaches to allow the students to be the ones who are really pushing the effort, because the students are the ones who are driving this team. And so as long as the students are interested, the coaches will be interested. But the thing is that was different was the coaches would typically be the ones who always felt that they needed to be in control and they needed to be leading this project, or this program. But what I was trying to explain to them was, hopefully the students, what we want are the students who are most motivated. So they had to choose 10 students. This is separate. When I pitched it to the schools, they had to choose 10 students to be on the team. And they, every single time I talked to them, they said, why is it only 10? Can't we have more? And I was like, if I had the more materials, I would. But right now we have 1 kit, that's 10 students. So you need to choose the students who are going to take advantage of this. And so we have 10 really motivated students. But then with that comes the fact that they're super motivated, they're gonna take it, they're gonna be going home, and if they're able to, they're gonna research and they're gonna learn as much as they can. And it's very difficult for a coach to keep up with students who are super motivated to learn about this material. So that was something I was trying to teach them and say, that's okay, that they're gonna know more. By the end of this season, they're gonna be professionals more so than you are in this field. So they're gonna learn how to use the spike, they're gonna learn how to program and build. And they're probably gonna learn a lot quicker than you are, but that's okay, because in the end, you're there to support them and you're there to be able to guide them towards the right answers. Maybe if you don't know the answers, you can say, we can look it up here, or you can ask me. So once the coaches knew what they were doing, of course, these coaching sessions happened about every 3 weeks, I would say. And they would happen on the weekends, and they'd be about 4 hours long. And there was probably around 30 people who came every time, which was awesome. And they all could ask their questions. But again, the coaches are one thing. The students, after the coaches, once the coaches were trained, we had the students as well who needed to be trained, because the coaches, again, as I said, they weren't comfortable going in and teaching this material, so often they would ask me to come. And I ended up visiting schools almost every single day that I was there, at least one school a day. So I was there from September till midway through January, and then back again in March for the competition. But every single day that I was there, I was almost entirely training coaches and training students and mentoring them. And so again, Wolfpack became super helpful here. They were, again, since they're in the US, they were mentoring over Zoom. They would call in, they would email. This is really kind of trying to make sure that this program had a ton of information and knowledge for these students and these coaches in the beginning, because we want to make sure that they have all of the answers to their questions the first year, and they have all the resources that they could want. Again, as we look forward, we're trying to figure out how we can make this sort of a more self-sustaining ecosystem sort of type of environment, really, where the coaches are going to be able to help each other. So that's why we have the WhatsApp group. But in the very beginning, we were mentoring teams every single day, and I was really the source of the knowledge. And slowly, I was able to connect people with Wolfpack, able to connect teams with Wolfpack, and they started taking over and basically making sure that these teams were keeping up. And again, the document of the week-by-week breakdown of what these teams should be doing to be competition ready was super helpful. So these are just some photos from the teams. This is Collège Saint-André, and then back here we have some of the different teams. This is Collège Clé-Soi. This is the Fawe Girls School, Gashora Girls School, TTC Niamata. And these are all schools that I visited, and they're all located around Kigali, sometimes an hour to 2 hours outside Kigali. And then a few of them are also located inside Kigali, which is great because those schools I was able to visit much more frequently. But then again, so that means since there is there's a distance between me and the further schools, I wanted to make sure that those schools that were located 2.5 hours away had all the information. So I'd give them the week-by-week breakdown in Kenya, Rwanda. I'd make sure that they'd be in contact with one of the Wolfpack members. Oftentimes when I would visit, I would Zoom with one of the Wolfpack members, and as well as with me as well, and introduce them to the team. And then from there, Wolfpack would be able to email every week or so and check in, ask if they have any questions. So these are again some more photos from the training sessions. This is a school called Fruits of Hope Academy. And in Rwanda, since it's outside of the US, the age group is 9 through 16 years old. So this is a group of 9-year-olds. But then I was also working with people who were 16 and some who had even turned 17 after the season began. So these are also older students and younger students. So it was great to interact with all of these different age groups. Some people who are even my own age. Was awesome. So we had support and partners. In order for me to do all of this, I needed to have a strong support system. And so that was what I first thought of when I was planning, was to make sure that I had organizations I knew I could talk to and work with in Rwanda. So that's why I talked to Codarina originally. I talked to Stella. And then some other groups that became super helpful was UNESCO. The National Commission for UNESCO ended up organizing training sessions at Creativity Lab for me. They paid for the coaches to come and visit, because the training sessions, for the coaches to arrive at the training sessions, they needed to be able to pay for transportation, because none of them have their own cars. So they need to pay for these, they're called moto taxis, or they're like motorcycle taxis. And so UNESCO paid for all of that. And they also put me in contact with an additional 15 schools who were already STEM focused and were really interested in robotics. So that was super helpful as well. So at one of my mentor sessions, no one showed up for the first hour. And that was super surprising. I was wondering, where is everyone? Was I just blown off? So I ended up texting the group chat with all the mentors, asking where everybody was. And it turns out, I hadn't realized this, but because it was raining, no one could actually reach the mentor session. They all have to go on these motorcycle taxis, which stop when the rain hits. And in Rwanda, it rains, when it rains, it downpours really. So it was understandable, but I just hadn't thought of that. And these were sorts of things that I kind of took for granted, because in the US, I'd say, okay, I'm organizing a mentor session. People would show up on time, they'd be able to arrive. I wouldn't need to pay for their transportation. But this was something I hadn't thought of. And so having kind of groups that were able to warn me or like let me know about these differences was super helpful. And that was that was kind of the part that Teach Rwanda, Stella, even the creativity played. And then also the University of Rwanda was super helpful. I talked to their education department and had some of their students that they were training for education roles actually were some of our mentors. So they learned the material, I pitched to them, I talked to them about the program and explained to them what FLL was about, and they ended up helping teach some schools as well, which is super helpful and super important. I thought that was actually something that was really unique about this approach, is going to the schools is great, but also going to the universities that are going to be training these students in the future. That way you're kind of training the teachers these are the future teachers of these students. So once they understand the program too, that makes it, it's going to make it a lot easier for future FLL teams to start once these future teachers are understanding the program. And then, of course, we talked to the Ministry of ICT and Ministry of Education, so the Ministry of Communication and Technology and Innovation, and then also the Rwanda Education Board. And these three became super helpful during the competition. So these teams that I was training ended up, I was training them for the competition that I was organizing. So this competition took place in March 4th. And without them, it would not have been possible to host this competition. And it was super important to get their backing for the program too, because I think I think this happened around towards the end of, or beginning of January, I could go back to these schools and say, look, your government has recognized this as an important program and now they're supporting me. And that just brought this whole program to another level. And I think it validated what I was doing in the eyes of a lot of the teachers. So that was super helpful. And then biggest of all was Codarina. They, as I said, are the first operational partner, and they made sure that everything I was doing was, again, met first standards. And they ended up sending me, actually, once I told them what I was doing, once I showed them that I'd already started talking to schools, they said this is awesome. And they ended up sending me an additional 20 kits. So that's how I started 35 teams, was because I brought 10, Codarina sent 20, and then there were some schools some of the international schools had some older EV3 models, which they were able to use. So we ended up having 35 teams in total, and that was only because of these partners who were able to support me. So where these partners really came in handy though was the championships. So this happened on March 4th, about a month ago. And I knew that's where I wanted this whole few months of effort to land. To lead. I wanted the students who were on these teams, to have an experience of being in a championship and being in a competitive environment with these robotics that they're learning with their project, and to really get the full FLL experience. So I knew I wanted a championship. And so early on, at the beginning of the year, so in January, I talked to the Ministry of ICT and the Ministry of Education, and I ended up reaching out to them through, I think it was actually Creativity Lab who introduced me to the Rwanda Education Board, and sort of worked its way up from there. And I was able to talk with all of these really higher up government officials, which I was never imagining. And they were so involved, and they were really, really enthusiastic about the program. So with their help, I was able to start realizing, okay, this championship is going to be a possibility. It's going to be a reality. I can actually make it a full-scale championship. Of course, it required a ton of planning. And at the end of January, I ended up returning back to Massachusetts because my school's second semester was starting, so I had to come back for school. And so I was actually really concerned, because I thought, once I leave, who's going to be mentoring these teams? What's going to happen to all of these teams if I'm not there to make sure that they're catching up and doing everything and following their week-by-week schedule? Of course, I had, and my organization, STEM Inspires, hired a few people who were a few of the Rwandan, I think it was we hired one person from the education department at the University of Rwanda, and he was a student mentor, and then one person from Stella, and they were really going to be running the program while I was away. and making sure that these teams were keeping up and visiting them. But again, I was a little bit concerned because I wasn't going to be there, and even just planning wise, it was more difficult. So I ended up having a ton of Zoom calls, checking in with the teams, of course, that had Zoom, but also just making sure that I was talking to these people in the Ministry of ICT and the Ministry of Education and explaining to them what we would need. Katerina and I ended up talking to them probably a total of 10 hours and over Zoom, just Zoom calls, maybe even more. That might be an underestimation. But we ended up talking to them quite a bit over Zoom, and then when I was there, I talked to them like right up until I left. I was talking to them. I was visiting members and explaining the program and showing them the materials and the robot. Probably every other day, I had some meetings with some government officials just to explain to them, because again, it's still government and they have a lot of rules and there's a lot of bureaucratic processes that we needed to go through just to make sure that they could fund this competition. So that was sort of the planning, and then just understanding what goes into running these events was something I really learned a lot about during this process. You have to train the coaches, you have to train the judges, you have to get the materials, organize the venue, who is going to pay for lunch, who's going to pay for transportation. Because in the US, you can just say, I'm going to host a competition, and that's great. And you do it to train the coaches, you do it to train the judges, and there's a lot of background planning that goes into that. But then this was another level, because a lot of these schools, none of the schools had buses. We needed to be able to pay for their lunch, because the students needed to eat and they couldn't bring a bag lunch. Even just communicating, because a lot of the schools say they would have internet, but then when I would go, they wouldn't actually have internet. So I would have to bring the Spike Prime app downloaded on a USB stick. And so to communicate with these schools I would have to buy airtime for some of the coaches. So when I was actually organizing the competition, I would make sure that some of the coaches who didn't have a way to communicate had airtime, which is the equivalent version of kind of like our internet now, because you have to buy MTN minutes, it's called airtime in Rwanda, and you have to buy that so that you can communicate, you can use the internet basically. So for the schools that didn't have internet, that was something that we made sure to have in place, especially before I left, so that they could communicate with me. And then again, just transportation, lunch, and making sure that these students were going to be arriving on time was super important. And then we had to talk about who's going to be the MC, who's going to be able to speak the local language, and who's going to be able to understand the board at the same time. These are just questions that were being asked by the group who was running by the Ministry of ICT, the Ministry of Education. And these are a lot of the questions also that I was thinking about, because I needed to figure these are the things I wanted to get in place before I left and to continue to work on as I was in Massachusetts. And so that really happened. Most of this all happened over Zoom calls and just organizing this and making sure that this would be able to be pulled off. So on March 4th, I flew down to Rwanda. I think it was March 1st I arrived, and it was just 15-hour days, just all day at the venue, training coaches, training the judges. The coaches are actually students of the African Leadership University. So they were all university students who were the coaches, and then the judges were all Ministry of ICT, Ministry of Education judges or employees. So they were all coming from there. And FIRST has a great program where they teach their volunteers online. So we took advantage of that, but also they needed to get their skills sort of refreshed and we basically needed to go over everything in person, because once we had these maps in front of them, we had some little pop quizzes of saying like, oh, what's this? What is the point value for this mission? And what does it do? These sorts of things that were just to make sure that they understood what they were looking at. It was particularly important for the refs. As you can see here, I'm talking to some of the refs. And this is again where Katerina was extremely important, because they were the ones who could organize all of the first material to give out, because they knew what needed to be done and what needed to be taught to these coaches and to these judges. But in the end, all the preparation paid off. We had judging in the morning, and we ended up splitting the day almost directly in half, because I know a lot of the FLL competitions I've gone to here, it's actually sort of sprinkled throughout. You have the judging and the robot game, but we did it where we had judging in the morning, then we had judging or robot game in the afternoon. And it was a super successful event. We had a high score of 280 for the FLL teams, which was super impressive. And I think the students really enjoyed it. I got so many happy remarks afterwards. I got so many messages. The students who had my email were emailing me, and they really said that it was eye-opening for them, that this program and understanding STEM, like the effects that STEM had, was super inspiring to them. And so now we have the top 3 teams who will be traveling internationally. And so in May, we have 2 teams, the 2nd and 3rd place team going to the Moroccan International. And then the 1st place team is coming to the WPI Open in June. So that's super exciting. I'll be able to see them here. And again, I think it was just so inspiring to see the students, the reactions of these students, because they've been working for a few months now. And now that they could see what other students were working on, and just to be able to see their progress as well, because they all knew where they came from, because they had just received these kits only a few months ago. So that was super inspiring. And then one thing that I was, right after the competition, actually, I found out that the Ministry of ICT made a video, which I'll play for you right here. First LEGO League is really bringing a holistic approach to engineering. What they want to do is create the future generation of tech innovators.
I was at that point in life where I was scared to actually join chemistry, computer science, physics, and all that. When you think of it, it's a bit complex. But actually, the most beautiful thing about it is that you can make an impact to the world using sciences, STEM, the whole STEM field in general. So if you actually want to live a purposeful life, STEM is actually enjoyable when you get to do it in practicals, when you implement what you're studying in class in our outside life. So competitions like this help us to do exactly that.
It's amazing that we were able to get up to 33 teams in first year. It's unimaginable. Usually we start little, we start with 14 teams, 16 teams, but the uptake in Rwanda has been amazing.
I also wish to appreciate the efforts of young technologists that we are here to witness. To them I say, this should only be the first step in you becoming global technologists and innovators. Rwanda and Africa are banking on you to turn our fortunes around. Please take your talents seriously and nurture them.
I really hope that everything that we've learned for the last 4 months is not just to get the skills, but it's to go back and create the same impact that Amelia has been able to do. And thank you, Amelia, for being here today, for choosing to do this in Rwanda, and for inspiring all the 30 schools that we have today competing.
The winner of the first LEGO League competition in Rwanda, please give it up for
Yeah, so that was the video that they ended up putting on their Twitter account and on their social media to share the program and to share the championship. And it was so surprising. I thought it was a beautiful kind of, it gave a great summary of really what happened. And in total, we ended up having 350 students, so from 35 teams. We had 700 attendees. We had the Minister of Education from Rwanda, the Minister of Innovation, Communication and Technology from Rwanda. We had the Minister of Knowledge and Communication and Technology from Botswana attend, and these were some really higher level government officials that were coming to support this program. So that was really inspiring to me as well too, because this showed that they're taking this seriously and they really appreciate this, and this is something that they want. So that was incredible from that point of view. And then this is the team, the winning team, Marinyundu Girls School, and they will be coming to Massachusetts in June. So I'm gonna be able to see them here, which is gonna be awesome. We'll be able to show them Wolfpack's whip and their makerspace. So I think they're really excited. I've been in communication with them and they're thrilled to be coming to the US. So I just wanted to briefly talk a little bit about the differences, really just because going to a completely new culture who had never had FLL before, there were some things that just struck me as things I hadn't thought about before actually going and working on what I was doing and starting these teams. So again, the language difference was huge. That was something I had sort of taken for granted. I assumed they'd be proficient in English, which most of them were, but my accent's different, I speak kind of quickly, and there was a lot of just repetition going on, and so I realized that it was really key for me to actually have these translated documents and to actually have people who were from Rwanda explaining these things as well, because so hiring those people from the university and having Philemon, for example, from Stella, go and talk to these teachers was super helpful. It allowed STEM Inspires to really connect with these coaches and these teachers on a different level. And then again, transportation was something that I just hadn't thought about. Internet issues and things like that, where maybe some schools said they would have internet, we'd go, because that was sort of one of the prerequisites that I had recommended to in my email, being like, really want to have, if you have internet, this is great, because then students will be able to go and look up any questions they have and go onto YouTube. But some schools, they just didn't have internet, so that was when USB drives became really helpful, because I'd be able to download anything I would need, bring it in, or paying for airtime, paying for this internet. And then the financial situation too, just the difference that asking a coach to come to a mentor session and spend $1 on the transportation and then $1 back was actually a kind of a huge, it was a big commitment for them. And so that was something I was not supposed to, I was trying to avoid doing. And so that's really, again, where UNESCO stepped in and said, we'll pay for their transportation. We can make sure that they get there. Because I would have coaches who would say this is great, and then they would come to the side or take me aside and say, I can't come because I can't afford to go there. So that was something that I was learning on the fly, really, just understanding, okay, there's certainly a difference here that we need to make sure we can provide from the very beginning, dropping off these kids to the very end, to training and competition and everything. It all needs to be provided for. And that's actually going into a lot of my fundraising now. So so on my website, as I'm fundraising, I say one team is $2,000 to start a team, which sounds crazy and it sounds outlandish. Like normally you would think $1,000 for a team to start, that would make more sense. But it turns out from the beginning to the end, it's way more expensive to start a team, because you need to be paying for a lot of these different services that are taken for granted in the US. You can have a mentor session, the teachers, if you have the mentor sessions I've been to in the US, or the training sessions, you'll have parents chip in, they'll say, I'll bring pizza for the kids, I'll drive them in. It's certainly different. That's not happening in Rwanda. You have to make sure that everything is organized to a certain way. You have to make sure that all the administrators are aware of everything that's going on. That was huge too. Just making sure that they knew when I was meeting with them, when I was coming in, what I was doing was super important. So I actually ended up having like WhatsApp groups with just the administrators, just to let them know what was going on and when the teachers would be busy, and so that they would understand the program. And then the teaching methods, again, I talked a little bit about this, but the difference in sort of student-led versus teacher-led, and that was something I really wanted to focus on, was having these student-led programs kind of flourish at these schools, and that was more difficult with the sort of more rigorous and strict learning environment that a lot of the Rwandan schools were working with. So I ended up working with 20 or 23 public schools, or their government schools, they're government funded. And then we had a few that were part government, part private, and then there's like maybe 4 or 5 completely private schools. And so the private schools, they were a lot more flexible, but of course the government-run schools, they want to follow all the rules. And so that was super important. Also just talking with the Rwanda Education Board and understanding how they were able to, or they would give me information and documents to make sure that I was doing everything the correct way as well. This of course happened, I learned about the Rwanda Education Board maybe at the end of December, and I had already been doing this for a few months, so that was something I wish I actually reached out to them earlier and gotten that information, just how to approach schools, and also what documents I should be saying to officially loan materials or to officially give materials, those sorts of things that I wish I'd actually thought about prior to sort of just going to schools and dropping off kits. And then again, incentives, that was something that I noticed was different. There was definitely a lot more incentive-based learning, and so then it really became, how do we show them the incentive is really the results here, like the programming and the learning that they're doing. And then just also parents in the household, again, as I talked a little bit about parent support, because a lot of these schools are boarding schools, it's mostly teacher support. So how do we make sure that the teachers are supporting these students? And then the familiarity with materials. Sometimes at the very beginning, I would go in and say, so can I see a show of hands of how many people love playing or like playing with Legos? And then I would realize, no one's ever played with Legos before. And then that's when I realized, okay, this is a completely different, I need to go into a completely different mindset as to how I'm going to be teaching this material, because people aren't familiar with Legos. They haven't played with them as a kid. They haven't grown up with them around. Rwanda, actually, I looked for Lego sets. I was like, okay, this will be in, like, maybe they're just not in the rural parts, maybe in Kigali there's some, but they aren't shipped and sold there. So I couldn't find any Legos while there. And that's just the Lego bricks. Of course, Spike Prime is like the more technical Legos, but just the Lego bricks weren't available. So those are just some things that I was like looking at and observing, and I wish if I had known some of these differences prior to going, I may have been able to set up a more efficient kind of program immediately. But of course, it was a learning curve, and I think in the end, just understanding and being respectful of their culture as well was super important. And the thing about Rwanda too is that they were incredibly hopeful and they're incredibly enthusiastic too. In the US, if I had tried to do this, it would have taken months probably to set up something official with the government, to talk to these people, to really get support from the government like that was incredible. And that would only be able to happen here in Rwanda, or happen in Rwanda, with their sort of like their enthusiasm for this material, for their drive. And I think that was something that I noticed was super important and super helpful too, because they really want this material. They really are passionate and they're really enthusiastic. So with their enthusiasm, it made it a lot easier to go and bring this to more schools and get more support, because once I had government support, I could go and talk and sort of pitch to people and say, look, this program that I'm working on in Rwanda is it's becoming a reality. And so that made it easier to try to secure funding for the competition as well as in the future. And so again, as I talk about the future, it's really, we want this program to be sustainable. We want this to live beyond Wolfpack. It's not just one and done. The fact is I'm taking actually a gap year, and then some Wolfpack members might be coming in the summer as well to come and continue to help this. But we're trying to train a larger group of people. That's going to be the plan. We already have people who are trained. We already have employees for STEM Inspires, but to keep on training people to make sure that that environment, there's a large knowledge base within Rwanda of FLL in general. We have student ambassadors already from the schools who said, I'm aging out next year, but I really appreciate this program. I love this program. And so we have about 3 student ambassadors who are going to be mentoring the younger students, and we're going to be spreading the program as well. Actually, one of our student ambassadors just signed up 5 more schools, which is super exciting. And so that's another thing where we're trying to have the youth sort of be the ones who are going to be perpetuating this program as well. And then UNESCO is going to be hosting multiple mentor sessions every year now. They've said that they're willing to do like every 3 months to host like a big day, like a full day mentor session on FLL, which is super important again, because that's going to be around for at least this year. Hopefully we can get a commitment to the next 3 or 4 years to make sure that we always have a mentor session in place where we have trained employees or people who are trained with FLL teaching. And right now we're also working with Coderina. Our Coderina is working on this right now, is getting a Lego education grant for Rwanda and making sure that there is money and basically funding that is dedicated to Rwanda in the coming years, because first it has some grants and we want to make sure that some of those grants get funneled towards Rwanda. And of course my organization will be continuing to work there. The organization is STEMinspires.tech, so if people want to take a look, you can see it's www.steminspires.tech. So that's the website, and it has a lot more information, and you can keep up with the program as it grows. But again, the goal is really to ensure that over the years, this doesn't get smaller, it only gets bigger. And that's what we really are hoping for. So just to kind of summarize everything, the outcome of this entire endeavor really was, we have 35 FLL teams in Rwanda, which previously had 0. It's now classified as a first Lego League region. And we had over 350 students involved, because oftentimes, as I said, you have 10 students on a team, so you had 350 at the competition, but almost every single team had an additional 10 students. So this is, again, we probably had around 600 students who were being mentored, but 350 registered students. And then we got over $90,000 of donation for the first Lego League program in Rwanda. That's from the ministry, that's from Coderina, in-kind donations. And the government now is super heavily involved, and they are looking to start another additional 100 teams or so in the next year. So right now, STEM Inspires is working on an MOU, just so a memorandum of understanding. It's like a contract between STEM Inspires first and the government to make sure that they say, we are in agreement to starting an additional 100 teams. And we are all on the same page and basically just committing to this endeavor as this coming year. So that's what I'm working on right now. And of course, I'm continuing to fundraise because this coming year, if we're going to buy all these materials, the grant will hopefully cover some of it, but a lot of it's going to need to be fundraised for. So that's what Wolfpack is working on right now. And there's a really positive outlook for the next few years. And again, as we continue to train, as we continue to grow, the hope is that, yes, we as Wolfpack members will be there and to support it, but once we step away, it's not supposed to fall apart. It's going to be self-sustaining, and that's really the goal here. And to that effect, we really want, again, this project to live beyond our team. So if anyone who's watching this is actually interested in getting involved, or even if you guys have questions, we'd love to hear from you. So you can email me at Amelia at STEMinspires.tech email, or reach out to Wolfpack Machina. So yeah, thank you for listening.